It is a happy Friday.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you for being here. And
thank you.
Arguably, Donald Trump, aside from his disappointment with his legal team, may have had a happy Friday. And at least one of these cases, he got what he wanted. He had called it election interference to be sentenced prior to voters going to the polls. And now he won't be sentenced until well after the vote count is in November 26th. Jeanne, my question is, does it even matter? Would it have mattered if he were sentenced 2 weeks from now, as was scheduled?
You know, I think it could have. We really don't know because we have obviously no historical precedent. I have to say myself as a political scientist, I think it was the responsible thing for Judge Merchan to do. It does, of course, rob voters of the ability to know that he has been sentenced. I can't imagine he would have been sentenced to jail, but sentenced to something. But by the same token, he is not like other defendants. He is one of the main candidates for president, and I think it's responsible to do it afterwards. But again, it does rob voters of the ability to know that he has indeed been sentenced. And yet, while that should be so important to him, he is out attacking women who accused him of sexual abuse in a bizarre, is probably the only way I can put it, 45 minutes today. With everything going on for him legally and politically, he chose to attack these women and say things, repugnant things like, oh, I wouldn't have attacked her on a plane. I wouldn't have attacked her on a plane in 1978. I mean, this is the top of the ticket. So even though voters don't know he's been sentenced, they know who he is watching this today if they were watching.
Well, of course, we knew none of these trials were going to happen before the election. At this point, with all the changes we've seen in this race, Rick, the focus on the economy, would it have mattered if you were sentenced before November?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, the only evidence we have is what happened when he did get convicted of 34 counts of criminal misbehavior. And we did see a movement down in his polling data for that 1 week that we had a sample size before the debate that completely disrupted the entire campaign. And so the little bit that we saw proves at least that voters were watching and didn't like what they saw, right? It's the first time he hasn't gotten away with something positive out of a legal drama that has occurred this year. And so I think it may be that it's a combination of things. I totally agree with Jeanne. If you're going to stand there and insult women, you know, 6 weeks before an election, I think that's just bad judgment. But the bottom line is, I don't think this is playing to his benefit anymore. And if anything, I think there's a net negative to even a day talking about being a criminal defendant or a defendant in a court case.
But he used to be able to fundraise off of it. It's how he made a lot of the tens of millions of dollars that he was able to raise earlier this year. It's now Harris that, as we've discussed over the last several weeks, has the fundraising advantage. The campaign says $360 million raised in August. That is almost triple what Trump raised. Is there any way to play the catch-up game at this point, especially if you're not going to be able to fundraise as easily off a court appearance each day?
Yeah, I'd say Tuesday night, right? They got a nationally telecast debate, 50 million people likely to watch it. If you have a knockout punch, you're going to raise a lot of money that night, either if you're Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. So that is the last moment, I think, that you can galvanize enough attention in America to have that kind of big bounce. But look, you know, the Harris campaign has a $100 million cash-on-hand advantage, you know, with 60 days to go. That is awful tough to think you're going to overcome. So at this point, you just got to pick, how much money do I have and where do I want to play? I can't play everywhere.
Well, Donald Trump's talking about the debate. He talked about it on Fox News and what was billed as a town hall. The debate, of course, on ABC TV. Listen.
ABC is the worst network in terms of fairness. They are the most dishonest network, the meanest, the nastiest, but that was what I was presented with. I think a lot of people are going to be watching to see how nasty they are, how unfair they are. I agreed to do it because they wouldn't do any other network.
I know he's watching Bloomberg right now, so let's assume that he's going to hear your answer. Jeanne, what's the whole purpose of trying to game expectations by insulting the network that's hosting the event? Incidentally, he suggested that she wouldn't appear on any other network, but this had already been agreed to before Kamala Harris was even on the ticket.
Yeah. Are you saying he is not being truthful about what
I'm not saying that. I'm asking you.
He's not being truthful about that, but he is trying to ensure that if the debate doesn't go the way that he wants, he can always say, well, I told you, look at ABC, this thing was rigged. You can hear even there at the town hall, he's getting guffaws and laughs from the audience. This is what his sort of base expects. It's what they've grown to love. You know, it's interesting. When he was at the Economic Club yesterday and he was a little bit more serious and a little bit quieter and more on teleprompter, if you will, it wasn't quite as entertaining for his base. And so they actually prefer that Donald Trump. And so he's going to play to them. And by the way, I couldn't help but think, because there's no other reason he was out at that press conference today on E. Jean Carroll, that he thinks he's going to fundraise off of that kind of thing. I mean, he is desperate to fundraise. So whether it's the debate or today on the court case, he seems to know he needs to get that money in.
Well, finally, another piece of news we got today, in addition to the news conference and the legal developments, came from the swing states of North Carolina and Michigan. There had been some dispute about whether RFK Jr., who was a third-party candidate, who was on these ballots, would still remain on them or not. A court ruled today he would be removed from the ballots. He, of course, has endorsed Donald Trump. What that means, Jeanne, is the absentee ballots that should have gone out in North Carolina today will not. There will be a delay. Michigan hasn't printed theirs yet. They don't mail out until beginning September 21st. So what's the net effect of this?
Well, it's interesting because Democrats are up in arms. They are, what do we know? They would like RFK to stay on that ballot because they believe that would decrease support for Donald Trump. And now you have what they describe as a GOP appeals court that has come in and said, no, he can't be on there. So the delay is one thing. People will get their ballots eventually and be able to vote. But this is, I think, indicative of what we're going to see with courts stepping in and having to decide everything from ballots to counts to everything post-election. So I think it's indicative of what's to come.